Hello, everyone, and welcome to a live episode of Overdoing It, where our team of library workers dish about their latest reads, views, and passions alongside fascinating conversation with local luminaries. I'm your host today, Tayla Cardillo, graphic memoir enthusiast and intellectual freedom fighter with a passion for serving youth. And our special guest, Raúl The Third, a New York Times bestseller and 3 times Pura
Belpre.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Pura Belpre, award-winning illustrator, author, and artist living in Boston. Vamonos, Let's Cross the Bridge was awarded one of the year's best illustrated children's books of 2021 from the New York Times and the New York Public Library, and his work centers around contemporary Mexican-American experiences and his memories growing up in both El Paso, Texas, and Juarez, Mexico. Thank you for joining us today, Raul.
Well, hey, thank you so much for inviting me to be on your show. This is pretty amazing.
So a little bit later in the show, we will answer some questions submitted by conference attendees. And if we have some time, we'll take some questions from the audience. But before we get into that, let's start off as we always do with what have you been reading?
Oh, well, so it's funny because I've been traveling a lot and my sleep schedule has been completely thrown off. I just got back from last week, Saturday or Sunday, I returned from a week-long stay in Dubai where I was doing school visits. And before I left, I was kind of suffering from insomnia, right? And then when I came back, I was having trouble staying awake. And it's funny because I've been reading this book titled My Year of Rest and Relaxation, which is about a young woman who wants to spend almost all of her waking hours sleeping. And there were times during the week that I wasn't able to sleep that I was completely jealous. And then during the time where I was falling asleep, like on my feet, where I completely understood, her interest in wanting to sleep. So that's what I've been reading. But I've also been reading like a lot of I've really been into, so I'm working on a graphic novel series called The Snips. And I'm taking a lot of nods from early American Marvel comic books and also a lot of just the page turning of manga. So I've been reading a lot of manga and American early Marvel comic books.
Nice.
Yeah.
How has it been? I don't know if it's your first time reading manga, but I know I've recently kind of gotten into reading manga, and even as a longtime graphic novel fan, it is kind of a different experience.
Reading from right to left.
Reading from right to left, and all the kind of like cultural notes that sometimes they have to put in as local, like when they translate it locally for English-speaking audiences or American audiences. Yeah. It's just like an added, it's like I'm not used to graphic novels having footnotes, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But they need it because...
Yeah, it's interesting because I understand why they decided to keep them from right to left. Just because sometimes when I create a mirror image of like one of my drawings, if like I have a character whose name is Fleelix in my new graphic novel, if they were to create a mirror image of him in the book, his watch would be on the wrong arm, you know?
Yeah.
So there are little things like that where if you really want to keep it true to how the illustrator intended it to be, then it's important for it to remain from right to left. But yeah, I could totally see the confusion. I've been reading manga though for decades now, and so I've gotten very accustomed to it. It doesn't take too long, before long you're like, oh, this makes sense. I know where to go.
Yeah. I don't know. I think it's just like I'm still not used to that switching because I do also read a lot of Western comics and like Western graphic novels. So it's like I have to switch it. I never know what way to stack the book. Seems like every library never knows where to put the barcode of like the cover, the back cover. We're not sure which is which. So it's been interesting. And it's something that I hope that I can hop into more because it's something that is very popular with.
Yeah, just find a genre that you like. Like if you like horror, jump right into Junji Ito, and you'll be like, oh, you'll get right into it.
So in terms of what I've been reading, I am continuing my mission to read nonfiction in the morning and try at the end of the day to read my fiction book.
Is it hard? Oh my God, I have to read a real thing this morning?
Actually, that's been easier.
Oh, okay.
It's sometimes at the end of the day, I want to do something like super mindless with my brain, like even more mindless than reading. But it's been somewhat easier unless I'm crunched for time in the morning. Then I'm just like, I don't have time to read. I just have to eat and leave. But
So what are you reading?
So I'm reading a book called Your Brain Is Not Broken, and it's by, I apologize that I do not remember the name. For our live audience, you can check it in the show notes when we publish the episode. But the author is a psychologist who has ADHD and who treats ADHD patients. I recently got diagnosed this past year. And so I've been doing a lot of reading and research and kind of like figuring out, not necessarily figuring out my brain, because in a sense, like I've always lived in this brain, but figuring out that there are like words and scientific explanations for how my brain works and why my brain works differently than other people. So I really had just started into that, but so far it's been really interesting. And even like there was a chapter all about struggles with emotional regulation, that people with ADHD feel really heightened sense of like all emotions, good and bad. And that was just something that I felt like was really validating for my whole life experience.
That's good.
So yeah, it's like, oh, that it's not just me is really nice.
Yeah.
So on the show, besides reading, we also talk about what we've been watching. So have you been watching anything interesting lately?
So yeah, I'm kind of been preparing myself for Furiosa.
Okay.
Which is George Miller's follow-up to Mad Max Fury Road.
Oh.
And so we've been going on our little time machine back to 45 years ago when he was making The Road Warrior and Mad Max, and we've just been having a swell time watching that world that he created. It's so beautiful to behold. And plus, once you get to part 3, you get to watch Tina Turner on the big screen or on your screen at home, and that's pretty awesome. So I've been watching that, and then this is kind of like a confession. I'm not sure if I should be proud of it, and I'm probably going to kick myself for even admitting it in public. But there comes a point in the creation of a graphic novel where you're no longer writing it and you're no longer having to plan it out. It's kind of all been penciled, and you've already pretty basically thought through everything. There's still spontaneity that happens, like with the creation of background characters, little background jokes or signage, so on and so forth. But my brain doesn't have to be completely connected to the thought process of creating this thing anymore. And so I might pop on a television show that doesn't require a lot of focus. And I have really liked watching Survivor lately.
Okay.
I'm not sure what it was, but I don't really have to pay attention. And every once in a while I'm like, oh, I can't believe that guy didn't get voted out. So it gives me that kind of that kind of thrill every 10 minutes. I'm like, ah!
You're just like, what?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's very funny to me because it's not been our experience. So in the intro, you heard that this is a new show, but Dave and I have been making Downtime with Cranston Public Library since pretty much the beginning of the pandemic. And it's been a through line of mine that there were two things that people always preface with, basically like, this is a guilty pleasure of mine. I'm sorry that it's not like a more intellectual answer or anything like that. And it's reality TV.
Yeah.
And romance novels, which is interesting. So it's always funny to me, like when people are like leading up, I'm like, all right, what reality show are you gonna hit me with that you feel bad that you enjoy? So yeah, that has always been funny to me. But we've had conversations before. If you like it and it's doing it,
go with it.
Yeah, then like people are making it. It's being made for a reason. So it's if your brain just needs brain candy, give it the brain candy. I guess for me, some of my brain candy has been, at least recently, my partner and I have been getting caught up on all the Star Wars animated stuff, especially with May the 4th. They dropped new stuff and stuff was finishing up. So we watched all of the newest season of Bad Batch, which I thought was fun. I mean, the audience is not adults. The audience is younger people, so there's not going to be like the depth of storytelling that there was in like Andor and some of the other shows that were meant for adults. But I enjoyed it. And
on May the 4th, my son had me to the Lego store, and I bought him. He's like, they just released like these miniature Millennium Falcon sets, and I want one. So yeah, that's what we did on May the 4th.
That's nice. We built a Lego BD-1, which is the tiny droid who chills out on the shoulder of Cal Kestis from the Last Jedi games.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so that's what we did on May the 4th. But around then, that weekend, we were also like getting caught up with these shows, and they dropped Tales of the Empire, which I thought was middling. It was like, it just sometimes not everything is great, but
I think the last show I watched that was Star Wars related was Andor.
Yeah, Andor was really good. It took me a little bit to get into it. I know our partner David was into it from the beginning. It took me a little, but like the prison episode, so good.
It was great.
Amazing. Let's get started on the Q&A. So our first question that we got submitted was, how did you like the We Are All Readers Festival?
Oh, the We Are All Readers Festival was a complete blast. I enjoyed, all of the creators who came to give their presentations, and the audience was just a lot of fun. It was a wonderful location, too. I liked it. I'd go back.
I'm sure everyone who's involved in We Are All Readers is happy to hear that. So another question that we got is, do you have a favorite age or format that you write for?
So there's like a few projects. They're all incredibly fun, but they're all also very different. So I just finished, just to show you the differences, I just finished a board book. It's my third board book in the Cocorocho series, and it's called Mi Mama, My Mother. And it took me all of 1 hour to write, and about 1 hour to lay out all of the drawings, and then 1 total week to complete the illustrations. So it was a very fun to draw. It was the illustrations. I'm really proud of how they came out, but I also really love how quickly I started and finished the project, because that's not usually the case. And so, for instance, I just finished about to start final art for my second The Snips book. It's called Enter the Wigmaster. And writing that book, about 157 pages, was probably like a month and a half of writing and revisions. And then I had to pencil the whole thing, and that was another couple of months, 2 to 3 months. And now that I'm on final art, it'll probably be like 6 months of work. And so that's almost an entire year of working. Each type of book has its rewards, and every one of them is incredibly challenging. So it's hard for me to decide what I like better. I mean, I do wish, though, sometimes when I'm like on page 120 of a graphic novel, and I have 30 some pages to go, and I'm like, I'm never going to finish this thing, and I just can't wait for it to be over, because it's just taking me too long. And my brain is such that while I'm working on it, I already want to be working on the next book and the one after that, because the ideas are beginning to generate in my head, and I just can't wait to get to them, because in my mind I've already finished the one I'm working. Yeah, problems, right?
And so the third and final question that we got submitted ahead of time.
Third, I thought that was the second.
Yeah, the question I'm about to ask you is the third and final question that we had submitted ahead of time. So we'll have plenty of time for audience questions. Which is your favorite book you've created so far? Kind of based on the last answer, feels like maybe it's a hard answer.
Yeah, it's usually the book that I'm currently working on, but boy, I wish I could share it with more people. That's the sound of a zipper. But this is one of the only copies in the United States right now. And it's called Vamos, Let's Celebrate Halloween and Dia de los Muertos. And pretty much these are 2 of my favorite holidays. I enjoyed drawing it because I got to draw my characters in Halloween costumes. I got to draw creepy, crawly things. That's pretty amazing. That's a fun day to clock into. And then I got to learn more about Dia de los Muertos. Of course, growing up in the border town of El Paso and Juarez, both holidays were celebrated, but it was nice to go in depth and learn more about it than the superficial knowledge that I had. And so getting to draw murals with calaveras inspired by the great Mexican artist Jorge Guadalupe Posada was something that was just incredibly fulfilling. Also, designing and drawing my own altars, and these altars are filled with ofrendas, which are basically offerings, ways to remember people that were part of your life that are no longer a part of it, was also incredibly fun. And then another thing that I like about this book, and this is a little bit more of a personal touch, is that these Vamos books are all colored by my wife, whose name is Elaine Bay. And anyhow, while we were working on this particular volume, her parents passed away. And so we had an altar in the book, and I had drawn 2 empty picture frames. And so to honor her parents, Elaine, who is also not just a colorist, but an incredibly talented artist of her own, drew portraits of her mom and dad in the empty picture frames. So at the moment, this book is absolutely one of my favorites that I have drawn. But then another one is one that comes out in January, and it's my very first graphic novel that I both wrote and illustrated. I grew up being fascinated by Marvel Comics, as I've mentioned. I loved the way that Stan Lee would communicate with his audience, calling them true believers or giving them no prizes. I love the wackiness of the storylines and of the villains. And sorry, that was my stomach. And so I've always wanted to create my own superhero universe that was as wacky and fun as those early Marvel books. And so I created the Snips. And the Snips are a team of superhero barbers. And they drive around in vehicles like sonic scissor jets, buzz cars, scissor stilts. They battle villains like the Unruly Hair Thing, the Bad Buzz Boys, the Wig Master, the Hair Patrol. On and on it goes, and I'm having a blast working on these. Yeah.
Sounds like a blast. What inspired the kind of like barber hair element of it?
Yeah, so that's an interesting story. When I was a little kid, I used to watch boxing with my dad. It was kind of the thing that we did together. Every Tuesday, they were called Tuesday night fights. And I didn't so much care for the fights that much, but I really did enjoy learning about the boxer and how they trained, and also a little bit about their personal history. Another thing that I think I really liked about it was Tuesday Night Fights was the only show on TV where I could watch somebody with my upbringing as a character on television. A lot of the boxers were Mexican or Mexican-American. And one of the boxers, his name was Carvajal, was his last name, Michael Carvajal. And what was fascinating to me about Michael Carvajal wasn't so much that he was a boxer, but that during the day, him and his family, his brother, himself, his dad, they were all barbers. And I thought it fascinating that here you go, they could be barbers and they could also go on TV and kick butt. And so the fact that people could live 2 separate storylines in their lives was something that I never forgot. And I always kept that idea of barbers as superheroes in my head. And when I was about 20, I wrote my first picture book with these barbers in it. And it was a story that was never picked up by a publisher, but I always kept it in my back pocket. And when I finally had the opportunity to work once again with my editor, Margaret Ramo, I dusted it off and kind of wrote a pitch and kind of finally figured out how to write and illustrate this book. It was the Snips, and it's pretty cool. It's been decades in the making, I guess you could say.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
All right, so do we have a mic to go in the audience? Do we have any audience questions? Oh, okay.
Earlier, you talked about your librarian as a child, Mrs. Burlingame.
Yes.
Does she know what you've done? And have you been able, I don't know if she's
That's
still
a
around,
great,
but...
unfortunately, no. And I have, done that kind of trying to track down a person through Facebook and social media. And her name does not come up in any of my searches. Also, that library that I showed in my slide wasn't actually the major library that I would go to as a kid. And the reason I don't show a picture of that one, because that one was right by my house, and we lived not too far from it, is that it closed down not too long after I started going to it. And so everybody kind of dispersed. And I really do wish that I could track her down and show her the certificates and everything else that I've been up to. It would be awesome.
Not to, from a bias of being a State Library Association member, but it's possible, depending on, I don't know how many years she worked, if you contacted the Texas State Library Association, there might be someone who remembers her or worked with her or something like that. And again, I know Texas is bigger than here, so it's possible that the 6 degrees of separation is literally 6 and not 1, like here.
Yeah.
But that's just a thought. If I know sometimes people stay involved in the association, and so if they were working, if they're retired and they were working the same time that she was, that maybe they might know.
That's a wonderful idea. I'll look into that. Thank you.
All right, so you write and illustrate all of your sort of own ideas, but I'm wondering, is there a book from any time in your history that you've read or sort of know about that you would like to adapt into a graphic novel if given the opportunity?
Yeah, so matter of fact, right before I started working on the Vamos books, I was working on a pitch to adapt The Eyes of the Killer, The Curse of the Blue Figurine by John Bellairs. I really wanted to create an entire graphic novel of that series, the Johnny Dixon series. It's because it had been my favorite as a kid. And I must have illustrated about 10 pages of it. And I had my agent contact the John Bellairs estate. And unfortunately, at the time that I was creating this pitch, a movie with Jack Black was about to premiere titled The House with a Clock in Its Walls. And the Bellairs family was positive that it was going to be this huge hit, and they wanted to wait to see if they could, to wait to see how successful the movie was going to be, to see where the state of the books were going to be. And then the movie came out. I don't think it did all that well. And then I started working on Vamos, and I don't think I'd ever have time to do that anymore. So, but that would have been a lot of fun. There's always moments where I'm like, yeah, it would be awesome to adapt this into a picture book or into a graphic novel, something like that. But lately, I've even received like offers from Marvel Comics to work on an anthology or something. And I start to write it, right? And then I'm like, yeah, but you know what? I could just turn these into my own characters and do that. And so that's what I end up doing. Yeah.
You were mentioning earlier that you, when you get down to the last 20 or 30 pages, that you're kind of ready for it to all be done. But I was wondering, when you're working on your illustrating process, if you ever kind of skip around and work on things that are more interesting first, because that's totally what I would do, and then be like, oh, I have all this that I don't want to do left to do.
Yeah, and it also happens with a writing process too, Like sometimes I'll have the idea for the ending right off the bat, and I'm like, okay, this is wonderful. And then it's just all about figuring out how to get there. So yeah, there's a lot of skipping around. And there are moments like, I know that in this book of Almost Let's Celebrate Halloween, there was one particular page that I knew was just going to really require a lot of technical expertise. There was going to have to be like 2 vanishing points, maybe 3 vanishing points, plus tons of alters and all of the little little doohickeys that people place on the altars. And I decided to save it for last because I knew that a lot of the details that I included in that illustration might be informed by some of the visuals that came either before or after it. And I can make it kind of the centerpiece that references the rest of them. And so there's reasons those are some of the reasons why I skip around. And also just because sometimes I just really want to draw the spread where the characters are kicking the villain's butt. And I just can't wait to get to that scene. And so I just draw it. Yeah.
So I have a handful of questions for you, but I don't want to take up anybody else's space. So the first question I have for you is a little bit based on your background, which you went into a little more detail on during the keynote. It sounds like when you were younger, a librarian introduced you to the idea of drawing to express ideas. And then much later in your life, you moved to Boston in order to pursue a career in visual design. And I'm curious about how you got from the point of starting drawing to the point where you actually wanted to pursue it as a career. What was the process involved in between those 2 points?
There was a lot of different steps that led to becoming a published illustrator. And I would say that each and every one of them was very beneficial to me. I think the most important part was actually beginning the journey. I think that was quite possibly the most difficult part, but also the most important. And it's one that I think beginning the journey is one that takes the most bravery, because you never know where it ends or how it's going to end. And my journey began at a very young age. When I was 16, I started to take the bus from El Paso. The bus line was called Rápidos Turismo, and it would take me from El Paso to Los Angeles, and then I would catch another bus from LA to San Diego, and I was all by myself. And I would take my portfolio with me, and I would basically show this portfolio to editors and other artists at the San Diego Comic Book Convention. And so this kind of helped me begin to break the ice with professionals. It also showed me that I had a long way to go. I had dreamed at that age that they would immediately hire me, and that I'd be able to drop out of high school and become a professional. And then once I moved to Boston, I moved there because my girlfriend at the time, Elaine, got accepted to get her master's at Tufts University. I just kind of, that beeping sound is annoying me, sorry. My wife, so I came to Boston, and I basically just started to do that public drawing thing. And not only did it lead to the gig at the library, teaching classes, but it also led to people recognizing that I was a person who drew and who could therefore help out in various things. I illustrated rock and roll posters for a lot of local bands. I was asked to paint murals. I said yes to basically anything that would come to me. And all of these different opportunities helped me grow as an artist. Like, I'd never wanted to be a muralist, but when somebody asked me if I could do it, I would say yes, figure out how to paint a mural and do it. Design a poster, design a menu, create artwork for restaurants. Like, I've done artwork for every single Painted Burro restaurant in the Boston area. And so I guess just being open to, I guess not defining myself as any particular type of artist, but being open to just trying to become an artist that painted murals, designed menus, and one day, finally, being asked to illustrate a graphic novel. And then 5 years after that, getting a phone call from Kwame Alexander, who asked me if I'd ever written a picture book before. I hadn't. And he said, don't worry about it. Pitch me an idea in a week. And if I like it, I'll put you on, I'll have you be one of the flagship titles in my new imprint, Versify Books. And so I said, okay, I could do that. And luckily enough, I came up with Vamos.
My next question is more related to my professional interest and my personal interest in art. So another thing that you mentioned in your keynote is how when you were younger, libraries were really important to you and they played a big part in your life, but then how later on in your life, you went back and looked at a lot of the materials that you consumed when you were younger and saw that it didn't necessarily reflect the culture in which you grew up. And so coming from a point of view as a professional librarian, what advice would you have for librarians working nowadays in their collections as far as doing better to reflect people from cultures like yours when they're younger and seeing that in their libraries?
Well, I think back then librarians might not have had the choices that today's librarians have, and so I feel that librarians are trying to have books on their shelves that serve their communities, that have programming that serves their communities, and so early on when we were trying to publish lowriders in space, one of the biggest, one of the repetitive sentences that we saw in letter after letter was that the book had too marginal an audience. And as I've traveled all around the country and I've been invited by librarians all around the country, one thing that is obvious is that these marginal audiences exist in pockets all around the country. And so it's important, even if it's a book that you might not want to read yourself, to have it on the shelf, because there might be that one kid who really needs that book so that they feel a little more confident stepping forward in the city that they live in or the part of the country that they live in. I know for me, all of these valuable ideas that I am currently working on, I didn't feel like confident making work like this because I didn't think that anyone would be interested in it. And so a lot of my early work is work that was about things that I saw that were readily available at bookstores or comic shops. And so I thought that's what I had to do to make it. The moment that you see that things about your culture and who you are important and valuable, then it gives you the confidence to put your foot forward. I know that happened to me in the 90s, especially, not just with books, but with the release of a movie called El Mariachi, directed by Robert Rodriguez. And that movie was like such an eye-opener that, man, you know what? Mexicanos, we're pretty funny. And we could be cool action stars. And things like that just really give you the confidence to do it yourself. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone, for your questions. We wrap up the show with a segment we call The Last Chapter, where we talk about a library or bookish-related question.
Okay.
So today, I thought I would ask you, would you rather have a personal library with unlimited space but only filled with books that you've never read, or a small collection of books that you've read and loved but no space for any new?
Oh.
I know. It's a stumper.
So here's the thing. I have a very great library in my house, and I love all of the books that I have, but I haven't read all of the books that I have, but yet I still want more books. So
that is the dilemma, huh?
So that's a very difficult question to answer. Although I do like new things. I'm always there on new comic book release day, and so I might choose the new library, the new books all the time, just so that I can always see what's happening and what's going on in the world and who's coming up and who's making their newest book and who's returned from the grave to make their last book, that kind of stuff. Yeah, I choose the new library. Okay,
I actually think the opposite. I would choose the opposite, and I think that's partially colored by being a librarian. And so I have a pretty small book collection at home right now, partially just because of space constraints in my living situation. But I also don't necessarily feel a pull to own a ton of books because I can get them from the library, read them, and then send them back and let other people enjoy them. So I think I'll go with the second one just because that's kind of what I'm doing right now, which is like really curating so that the books are like, look at all these books that I love, as opposed to this like grab bag of new stuff.
Well, I guess that's where we disagree. No, just kidding.
All right. I know you already talked a little bit about some of your upcoming work.
Yes.
But are there any, or to reiterate it for everyone here, what should people be looking out for from you?
Definitely check out Vamos, Let's Celebrate Halloween and Dia de los Muertos, coming out in July. Don't ask me why, but coming out in July. And then there is The Snips, A Bad Buzz Day, coming out in January from Little Brown and Company. And then if you can't wait for that, be sure to check out any of the 10 previous World of Vamos books, or to get ready for Stunt Boy Book 3, read Stunt Boy in the Meantime or Stunt Boy in Between Time. Those were written by Jason Reynolds.
Fantastic. So thank you everyone for joining, and thank you everyone for listening. Overdoing It is proud to be a resident partner of the Rhode Island Center for the Book and brought to you by library staff and community members across the Ocean State. If you would like to respond to our last chapter question or just reach out to the show, you can send an email to overdoingitpod@gmail.com. And again, that's overdoing it like your overdue library books, itpod@gmail.com. Or you can find us at Instagram, also overdoingitpod. If you enjoyed today's episode, please go and rate and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It helps us reach more Rhode Islanders. Thank you again for listening, and this has been another episode of Overdoing It, the Rhode Island Library Podcast. We're overdoing it, but you're doing just fine.
Yay, that was awesome. Thank you.